The Future of Education Summit was held recently, and high on the agenda were the challenges faced by institutions of higher learning across the African continent. The summit also focused on addressing the future of education in Africa, this in light of the fast-developing Fourth Industrial Revolution. It was a gathering of local and international stakeholders in the higher education space. Rakesh Wahi, the co-founder of the ABN Group and the founder of the summit, welcomed the guests to the gathering and shared some staggering statistics of the growing demand for higher education in Africa.
Africa's population will double to 2 billion over the next few decades, and the continent will have the youngest workforce. 18 million people annually have to be trained and absorbed into Africa's economy. Each one of them will require relevant education prior to entering the workplace. Today, African universities are faced with overcrowding, underfunding, and consequently, quality concerns. As a result, over 500,000 university students leave the continent every year to study abroad. This correlates to about $15 billion leaving the continent every year. And none of the students, or most of them, don't come back. This is an ever-increasing issue being dealt with by most countries, and during economic downturns, you'll find that governments are unable, particularly when you see the case of Nigeria, to meet their commitments, and therefore students are left stranded in developed countries or in international universities. This is not a sustainable model, and it needs to be addressed. With its rapidly growing and very young population, Africa is faced with developing additional higher education capacity to accommodate about 10 million students every year. A back-of-the-envelope calculation shows us that we need at least 600 universities of 15,000 students each to make this work. So some serious questions arise from this reality. How will the infrastructure be developed? Where will the academic staff come from? And where will the money come from?
So, what is the current state of higher education in Africa? 2 years ago, only 6% of young people in sub-Saharan Africa were enrolled in institutions of higher learning. That's compared to a global average of 26%. The promising news is that universities in many African countries are experiencing a surge in their enrollment. Between 2000 and 2010, according to the Africa America Institute, higher education enrollment more than doubled to 5.2 million from 2.3 million. The problem that stands, though, is that supply does not meet the increasing level of demand. The Minister of Higher Education and Training, Hlengiwe Mkhize, highlights some of the pertinent issues in the South African context.
Pressing issues. We are looking at the transformation of our institutions of higher learning, especially the universities. Transformation from a point of ensuring that because now we have changing student population, universities are ready to absorb them, be able to support them so as to improve in terms of throughput. But also we have pressing issues in terms of transforming our TVET colleges and making sure that they are aligned, their curriculum is aligned with that of universities, and people who get through to these TVET colleges are able to acquire the skills that the industries require, and are able also, when they feel they want to continue with their education, to be accredited in universities. So those are really important issues because it's about realizing post-school education and training objectives.
Mm-hmm. Now, in his opening address, Mr. Rakesh Wahi mentioned a statistic that about 500,000 young people go abroad to study. Is this something that your department is looking at in terms of retaining talent here, teaching it, and not furthering this brain drain issue that we have on the African continent?
I think partly the reason why it's important to make sure that our systems are respected and they work in the interest of students' welfare is to make them attractive. A student shouldn't wake up today and have a desire to go to America or any part, except if there's, for exceptional reasons. But now they go out of the need. Look at the number of medical students who are training outside. So we need to work very closely with our institutions, make sure they are transformed and they are able to absorb as many young people as possible, their aspirations, but also the offerings. Sometimes traditional universities who offer traditional courses, they're not able to attract students who are looking, for instance, at the fourth industrial revolution, who look for somewhere and say, oh, there's a Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I want to be there. So those are some of the things we are looking at, that where our centers of excellence.
With limited funds, African governments are increasingly entering into public-private partnerships with companies and investors for infrastructure development projects to build academic facilities, student and faculty housing, and other facilities that will enrich the learning experience of the student.
I was talking about this historic mistrust between government and business, that it is undesirable, totally undesirable. We need to make sure that we mobilize the resources in the hands of the private sector. That includes investment in higher education. We need to mobilize and unleash those investments to build an education system in our country that will be able to live up to the expectations of a post-apartheid South Africa, but also a new world. We have the fourth industrial revolution upon us. So both government and business needs to make shifts. Fortunately, in Gauteng government, the Gauteng provincial government has been working very, very closely with business to tackle the challenges we face in very concrete terms. There are issues to turn around the performance of various sectors of our economy. We can only do so if business does what it is supposed to do, and that includes investing hugely the resources in the hands of the private sector into areas that really, really matter. And us as government, also we need to break with this historic mistrust by basically coming to the fore and doing those things that government is supposed to do. We ourselves have to put public resources where it matters most to unlock the full potential of our population, to unlock the full potential of various sectors of our economy. So you can only address mistrust in practice and in action.
Former public protector and academic advocate Thuli Madonsela speaks about the fourth industrial revolution being unavoidable.
The fourth industrial revolution is with us, whether we invited it or not. It's here with us. What we need to do is to future-proof Africa by making sure that we harness the dividends of the fourth industrial revolution. We don't complain. We look at how do we, for example, use innovation to make sure that Africa creates its own products that are part of the fourth industrial revolution. Insofar as some things have already been created, like, for example, digitalization of the retail industry, how do we make sure that we create secondary industries that support that? The fact that communication, connectivity is part of the fourth industrial revolution, which has killed the normal telephone. But how do we make sure that our industry is ready to develop young people to not only repair cell phones, but to make them? I would love to see an African computer being made, an African tablet, and an African cell phone.
Another theme that came across quite significantly is education with a purpose. We see a lot here, people are being educated, as you've said, just to get employed. But how would you suggest that we change the manner in which education is conducted to afford people to actually go out and create their own opportunities?
Thank you. I think we can rethink education from the cradle to the grave. From a child who is very small at preschool to be educated to understand that really they have a right to be a creator of work, and they can work for someone else, but the first person they should be able to work for is themselves, because that would create that entrepreneurial spirit. Would never have an unemployed graduate, would rather have an independent business owner who perhaps has a struggling business, but nobody would call themselves unemployed. But secondly, what I think needs to happen is to look at how do we leverage private educational institutions, especially the ones that we're thinking about creating, and saying, well, we're still trying to transform the existing ones at tertiary level. How about making sure that the new ones that are coming in immediately close the gap? They make sure that there's no longer a difference between academic education and applied education. As people are being educated, they're already being given the tools to innovate, to research.
Where there are problems, there are always solutions. The Transnational Academic Group is a private stakeholder invested in the private higher education on the African continent. The group has become a leading quality tertiary education provider by bringing world-class universities and curriculums to the continent.
This is my second, so the first one obviously I was working with my uncle, who obviously I joined about almost 11 years ago now. But I think my capacity in working in the campus in Dubai was more about getting it set up. I think the campus in Ghana, obviously there was a lot more which went into it in terms of the partnership development, looking at the regulatory framework, as well as then going on ground and getting a campus. It's not something I ever dreamed of doing. I never dreamed of actually being in education. If you ask me today how I did in school, I would often meet one of my teachers or matrons, and when I would tell them I'm actually working in the education space, they sometimes laugh at me. So, so I think, it was an exciting time. It was very challenging. I think the opportunity to come and set up a campus from scratch is, we've obviously done quite well in the last 4 to 5 years, but still a lot more room for improvement and growth. And as the group's investing in the tertiary education space, we anticipate opening about 3 to 4 of these campuses across sub-Saharan Africa. So we're calling them centers of excellence. And then around that, we're looking at different programs and courses.
Now more than ever, governments will need to source partnerships with private stakeholders and with organizations like the Transnational Academic Group, who have paved the way and made clear the mandate as well as the direction that stakeholders need to take in the future of education in Africa.